Hey everybody, welcome to the Blendr Report, where news meets rational thinking. I'm your host, Jonathan Harvey. This is your co-host, Liam de Boer. Liam, what are we talking about today, bro?
We are going to be going over a recent Peterson and Musk interview claiming that the woke mind virus is ruining Canada, crime skyrocketing under Justin Trudeau, U.S. senators raising the alarm over Canadian terrorist threats, Trudeau, appointed chair of Liberal Green Slush Fund, found guilty of using funds to advance her own business interests, Canada having the third worst GDP growth per capita among 30 top economies, and Trudeau vacationing in BC after Liberal MPs told scheduling summer caucus meeting was impossible. However, if before we get into things, you wouldn't mind subscribing to our channel and tossing a thumbs up on this video as it greatly helps this podcast grow, that would be appreciated. All right, let's get started. All right, so first off, we've got Peterson and Musk claiming that the woke mind virus is ruining Canada. Jordan Peterson and Elon Musk vehemently criticized the woke mind virus and its effects on Western society in a recent interview. Peterson highlighted how the ideology of anti-racism and inclusivity has ironically increased division in racism in Toronto. Musk echoed Peterson's concerns, calling the diversity, equity, and inclusion policies a new form of racism and sexism. Peterson also condemned his colleagues in the psychological field for their approach to gender-affirming care, calling them contemptible cowards, and asserting that those involved with minors should face imprisonment. Musk agreed, describing gender-affirming care as a euphemism for child mutilation and sterilization. Musk shared his personal story, revealing that he was tricked into approving his son Xavier's transition. Musk concluded by expressing his commitment to fighting the woke mind virus, vowing to prevent it from harming more children in society as a whole. So is the woke mind virus as dangerous as Musk and Peterson characterized it to be?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is, but the way I would look at it is, what does the woke mind virus lead to? What does it do in society? So more objectively, because you and I can say, yeah, it's horrifying. What does it actually do? So it leads to censorship, right? So they're limiting free speech and open debate, but especially on sensitive or controversial topics. The things that they deem important, we can't even discuss, right? Identity politics, which basically prioritizes issues related to race, gender, and sexuality, which we all know is wildly inappropriate in reality. It only creates a deeper divide, right? And then cancel culture, of course, where people are ostracized socially and professionally for expressing views that are deemed offensive or unacceptable. In other words, challenging their narrative. And of course, virtue signaling. And you see this from individuals. You also see it from companies. There's a video I was looking at today. Harley Davidson has gone hard woke. It's wild what they're doing. But they're an outlaw brand. That's not their demographic. None of those people they're going to ruin a great American company by doing this virtue signaling and going woke here. There's no value in it at all. So I think it's pretty dangerous, but I also think it's contributing to like this weird sort of mass psychosis of mental illness. The stuff that these people are promoting and supporting and what they're doing, especially the children, this is going to be looked down upon for centuries. How dark this period is right now in history, and people right now, I think anytime like this, something like this happens in society, you're not aware of it often when it's happening if you are part of that group, but this is horrifying. Yeah, this is very dangerous. And yeah, I agree with these guys. It needs to stop.
So I want to touch on something you talked about there, where it was the mass mental illness and delusion, essentially, and take this from a philosophical position. So Rene Descartes was kind of one of the foundational skepticism thinkers, kind of questioning, can you even really know that anything is true, right? Like how, for instance, this would be the Matrix concept, where how do you know that you're not living in a simulation and everything that you're experiencing is really just, say, stimuli being put into your brain, but you're not actually present or having those experiences. So he kind of was forming these questions way before, like this was hundreds of years ago. But one of the things that he said was, there are certain things that we can know for sure. So for instance, whether you're in a dream or whether you're in reality, 2 + 2 still equals 4, or a square has 4 sides. These things, these aren't just experiences, they're fundamental facts about the world, right? But then he also kind of posited, okay, well, what if a demon could come along and convince me that 2 + 2 equals 5, or that a square has 5 sides? like this thing would now be interfering with my ability to actually form knowledge and know what's real around me. And that, whatever that demon he was, that he was alluding to, whether you want to go spiritual with it or not, I think that's exactly what this quote unquote woke mind virus is. It tells men that they can be women. It's, even actually there was the famous case of the biostatistician at Harvard was claiming that 2 + 2 = 4 is part of the white hegemony, and that he was claiming that you can actually make 2 + 2 = 5. And so I think this mind virus, whatever you want to call it, whether demon, anything of this sorts, I think it is actually anti-life and anti-reality. And you look at what the actual outcomes are of the policies that everything that comes from, say, quote unquote woke, whether it be gender affirming care, which is such double speak because it's really it is just undoubtedly child sterilization. These are the same drugs. It's the same drugs that they use on sex offenders when they want to chemically castrate them. And also even just the actual surgeries, these aren't life affirming care. And so, or even on, say, the economic front, it's okay, the idea of private property and ownership and capitalism and all of this which has created the mass population boom that humanity has experienced.
It's also given these assholes the tools they use to espouse all this nonsense.
Yeah. So, but you look at this and it's all like tear it down. It's all destruction and division as well. And actually, we were talking about it, right? And it's just double think left, right, and center. These mental hoops that don't make any sense. It's just mental gymnastics. Like, for instance, how I was pointing out to you how they say diversity and equity, which equity is equality of outcome.
Impossible for humans.
And anytime it's communism, let's call it what it is. This has been tried before. It led to the deaths of hundreds of millions of people. Low estimates are 100 million. High estimates are like 250 million. So like the most destructive ideology ever has been equity, so to say. But then this idea of diversity and equity right beside each other, like you can't have diversity and then also have everything be the same. Everyone have the same, like different.
It's diametrically opposed.
Yeah. No, but if you give people freedom, they're going to choose to take two different routes, two different paths, and all of those different paths will yield different results, and different results are different outcomes.
Oh, it's impossible. It's an impossible task. It's just ridiculous that the people that are kind of spouting this stuff, it's an impossible task. But what surprises me is that people don't see through it. People believe in it and people work towards it. And that to me is just so crazy because, like, as an entrepreneur, look, you build a business, you have metrics that measure success. You know what you're trying to do. It's a very linear path. Obviously there's problems along the way, but it's objective, and if you're doing well or not. The market will always tell you. So you live in that space. You kind of start thinking, okay, well, if that business didn't work, what did I do wrong? How did that not go so well? You start kind of putting it together, and you get better and better and better. There's all this feedback. And then you're working towards something and accomplishing this goal, and you logically understand what the goal is. Can you build a restaurant? I know I've got several. I've had several. So I know the business. These people, they're working towards something that is forever out of reach. It's literally impossible. And it just surprises me that they've got so many supporters and so many followers, because honestly, for lack of a better term, anybody that follows this is an idiot. I'm sorry, but like you actually are just stupid.
Either an idiot or a coward, because they electively turn off their brain in order to go along with these kind of things. So it's not even like they're incapable of understanding that it's wrong. It's that they willingly go along with it in order to avoid, say, public scrutiny or something along those lines.
That would be actually something you and I have talked about before. You're either an idiot or a coward. You're right, because what's happening is, often, I'm sure it's just young idealistic kids, and I'll put those people in the idiot category. I've been one myself. We all are. It's just a rite of passage. You're dumb when you're young. You have these ideas that the world can be peaceful and everybody can eat. And it just doesn't work that way, unfortunately. It's just what it is. So I understand that. But to go beyond that, for people to buy into it when they're beyond that phase, it's tribalism. And you and I talked about this. We talked about this through COVID. where you'd see super, super intelligent people that would buy into all the COVID nonsense they were saying, which was absolutely preposterous. Like you have to wear a mask when you stand up and not when you sit down.
I saw somebody wearing a mask in their car alone 2 weeks ago.
Right. And the thing is because they are part of a group, they're part of a tribe. And what you and I came to realize when I called this group of people idiots, which I still kind of stand by, is tribalism trumps intelligence. So these people can have moments of brilliance. So they're not always going to be idiots. And maybe that's how they collect more people. But when their tribalism kicks in, everything else goes to the wayside. And that's what leads their way. And I think that these people are a part of a group. They're part of a tribe. They're part of, this, they have this one big goal, which is horrifying. But because they're a part of this, that sort of trumps the intelligence. It trumps the logic. It trumps everything else. And when you think about it, tell me the last person you saw. When was the last time you saw a really good looking buff dude who was a part of the woke mob?
Yeah, very rare.
Doesn't happen, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't happen. So what it is, it's kind of these outcasts. The problem with outcasts is they never belonged. They never fit into a group. And now that they fit in, now that they found their tribe, they're not letting go. And that was why I think a lot of those people were so vicious with the masks through COVID. They were part of this gang finally. They had it, you know what I mean? And that's what I think is kind of leading this charge, is that somehow whoever's in charge of this group understands that tribalism and how this thing works. And they've managed to convince an entire generation of kids basically that this is the way. Unfortunately, like you said, it's led to the deaths of hundreds of millions of people. So this isn't going to pan out. And this woke mind virus is dangerous.
Yeah, I don't even know if there's anybody in charge of it. I don't really think that I've said the quote here before with Carl Jung where people don't have ideas have people, and these ideas they come around all throughout history and they never really go away. But one thing that I've noticed with the whole, say, quote unquote woke ideology is that, like you were pointing out, where you never see highly successful, buff, good-looking people that you look at and you go, "Oh, I'm envious of what that person's got going on." Or I wouldn't even actually really say that envy is a good thing, but you never really look up to those people.
Right. You don't aspire to be.
Yeah. And so what I think is, when you have an ideal, so let's say you have the masculine ideal or the feminine ideal of like what it means to have femininity or masculinity, all of this kind of stuff. It's essentially something to judge yourself against. Like, am I living up to this ideal?
Yes.
And whether it's that, whether it's beauty, whether it's fitness, whether it's entrepreneurial success, any of these sorts of realms, when people don't feel like they can live up to an ideal, they'll try to tear that ideal down and drag it through the dirt in order to mock it. And then so that way they don't have to feel the shame of not living up to it anymore. Right. And this is something that I've even with Karl Marx, for instance, his whole ideology was based on the fact that capitalism is oppressive and unfair, and therefore it should be abolished and overthrown. But you look at Karl Marx as a person, it's like he was leeching off of his family left, right, and center. He never paid back any of his family loans. He couldn't take care of his own family. He never was able to hold down a job. Like, the dude was just a loser.
He was a deadbeat.
And he created an entire ideology for loser deadbeats.
Yes.
And so what I think has happened is it's not necessarily like one person or one group of people has forced this whole ideology upon society, but I think we've kind of stepped out of the way where, I'm not saying we should ruthlessly put down all of these people, but we've kind of had like that as a culture. I don't mean just you and I, but like there's that kind of like success guilt. Like, say for instance, survivor's guilt or whatever from a war, right? Well, if somebody does well, and then this culture comes along and tells them that successful people are evil people because they're taking away opportunities from the less successful by having those opportunities, then what those people will do is to try to get that target off of their own back. They'll actually continue to espouse those ideals back to them and go, yeah, you know what? Everything I have is unearned privilege or whatever. And then that idea can just kind of take hold and run rampant through society once the successful people start actually helping it go along. And that's what you're seeing, whether it be in Hollywood or politics or all of this kind of stuff.
Anybody doing that's a weak bitch.
Yeah. But yeah,
full stop.
Yeah, I agree. But they've just been very successful in kind of making the people that do take responsibility for themselves, that are successful, feel guilty for it.
Right. And I think the thing is, I agree, this has been around for centuries, this idea and this type of woke nonsense, but it's in the forefront right now. So I do think there is a group, but this has become, somehow this got baked into to liberal politics, to democratic politics. I don't know how, but this is exactly what's happened. Like, if you want these things to take the forefront in society, you need your hands in policy. This is exactly what has happened. So there is literally a group pushing this forward right now. I don't know what's happening behind the curtain, but I know what's happening in front of it. It's liberal policy. So for me, like, it's dangerous now because it's being enforced. You know what I mean? We're being like compelled speech. Right. Censorship is very real. Like, some of the identity politics stuff is legitimate. Like, it's pretty wild. Like the race-based hiring they're doing in the government, they're cheering about it. Like, what are you talking about? Like you said, you and I can't get grants because we're white males. So this stuff is actually affecting us pretty significantly. And like I said, like I'm glad Musk and Peterson are pushing back against this, but it's a pretty good indication of how wildly screwed up things are right now when you have the richest man and one of the most powerful men in the world in Elon Musk sitting there having to fight the culture war right now. Like, that's such a bad use of his time considering what he's capable of, but it just shows you how fucked up things are right now.
Yeah, I agree. Well, the rest of this episode is pretty much just going to outline the actual objective outcomes of these kind of quote unquote woke policies. So we've just seen now that crime has skyrocketed under Justin Trudeau. Since Justin Trudeau took office, crime has significantly increased according to new data from Statistics Canada. Violent crime has risen by 50%, with specific increases noted in homicides, which are up by 28%, sexual assaults increasing by 74%, auto thefts are up by 45%, and extortion is up 357%.
Fuck, let's go extortion.
Critics attribute the rise in crime to Trudeau's soft on-crime policies, particularly the implementation of Bills C-75 and C-5. So, is Trudeau to be blamed for Canada's crime?
Well, let's look at why crime is up. Economic challenges, unemployment, and financial stress. That's on Trudeau. Social disparities and poverty. One study suggests that over 10 million Canadians are now in poverty. That is a significant increase over the last 10 years, which has all been under Liberal rule. That's wild. Bail reform, like you said. Bail reform and lax penalties on committing crimes. Trudeau. Both of those. Substance abuse, another one contributing. Trudeau's allowed the decriminalization of drugs in some areas in this country, along with these safer supply programs, which has significantly exacerbated the problem. He also, a memo leaked the other day, they had a strategy for a nationwide decriminalization of drugs, the whole country. That would have been pure chaos. And immigration, it's just not the net positive they continue to tell us that it is. It's contributing to a lot of the economic problems, but also directly to crime. Again, it's pretty clear this is on Trudeau.
Yeah, and you bring up the whole economic issues, but I vehemently disagree with the idea that when people have a tight wallet, that all of a sudden they turn to crime. There's cultural influences that push crime or even glorify crime. And I don't think just good people all of a sudden, when they start struggling, they turn to violent crimes. Economic scenarios cannot explain a 74% increase in sexual assaults or homicides increasing by 28% and such, right? So, and I mean, even when it comes to the auto thefts thing, I do think all of these issues stem from immigration. And I've pointed out before how it doesn't take much. Like, that doesn't mean all immigrants are criminals, but all you need is a very select few amount of people who are violent criminals, who are psychopaths, to come in and create mass mayhem, right? We were talking on a recent episode, we played a clip where Polyev was pointing out how 40 people in BC were arrested 6,000 times. So
yeah, that's wild.
so it's all it takes is a very small number. But what happens here is when all of a sudden, though, that very small number is, let's say they come from somewhere in Africa where crime and violence is rampant and is a cultural normality there. Well, when they come here, we can't even address it because our culture has told us that any pointing out of the fact that those people are doing those crimes is immediate evidence of racism, right? So we take these people in, a small portion of them from overseas, and then when they do crime or any offenses of that nature, we're not allowed to police them.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you for the most part. I think a lot of it is cultural, but there are a few studies that show when the labor market is down or there's unemployment is high, and then when there's bad economic conditions, violent crime increases, property crime increases. There's one as actually I think as recently as 2008 in Germany. And it highlighted how the economic stress influenced crime rates significantly across various types of crime in geographic areas. So it is a contributing factor. I don't think it's the only reason, but again, we looked at several reasons why crime is up, and it is a correlating indication. Pardon me, it is an indication that crime is going to go up when the economy's down. Like you said, I think there are more people than you believe that are sort of on the edge. And I think when people are desperate, they'll do desperate things. And again, this might be a bump of 5%. You know what I mean? It may not be huge, but again, we looked at several reasons why. And I think that if I had to say the number one reason is bail reform and lax penalties. Those are the top two for sure. Absolutely. That's probably contributing to 75% of it. However, there is still a cohort of people that kind of live on that line that would prefer not to, but will. Think about it like restaurant server. You and I were talking earlier today about how easy it is to steal from them, right? We know we've worked in them for ages. And I've caught people stealing some pretty crafty ways, to be quite honest with you. But you and I don't do that. If things were bad, I'd be willing to bet an extra 10% of servers and bartenders would be taking a little extra money because they can't afford groceries. I just believe that it would happen, right? So when you consider that, you can say, okay, when the economy's down, yeah, people are going to do more, like even theft, small things, stealing from Shoppers Drug Mart, whatever the hell you're doing. You know what I mean? I think people, when desperate times hit, they will take desperate measures.
But one thing to consider here is all of these statistics are violent crimes. That's very different from, say, skimming $2 of tip money off of each
Well,
drink.
we're talking about crime going up in general. Now, economic conditions and violent crime, there was a study done too that does show economic stress creates an increase in violent crime. Now, again, an example I would give you, violent crime, a significant number of murders are spousal, are in the home. Most men don't know how to deal with their emotions. They think that anger is not an emotion. Well, it is. And if you're not making enough money and your wife's making you feel like shit because you can't provide for her and you get angry, you have a few beers, maybe a few more, you're going to see an uptick in probably violence at the home. I guarantee it. There was a huge uptick in violence at the home through COVID as well. Also a massive uptick in drinking. So again, I think at the end of the day, we're on the same side. I believe, like I said, 75, 80% is probably coming from bail reform and lax penalties. But when economic times are tough, there is more crime because of it.
So Thomas Sowell has actually done good work on this as well. And he points out that it's a chicken or the egg scenario. And what a lot of people jump to is that economic hardships cause crime. But what he's gone to great lengths actually in that book right there, Discrimination and Disparities, what he points out in that book is that crime actually causes negative economic scenarios. Because look at what you're seeing right now in California, right? So the bail reforms and all of this stuff comes first, right? But then now what do you see is you see places like Walmarts and fast food chains and all of this kind of stuff pulling out of the inner cities after the violent crime starts to go up. So it's actually because the cost of doing business in those areas, once you put those policies into place, starts going up, and the private security or the theft or all of this kind of stuff just crushes their bottom line. And then he also goes back and forth, and I'm not going to go into the into the different cultures, but he shows how actually when different cultures experience poverty, there is massively different reactions in crime. So, for instance, one of the ones that he pointed out was that even when places like in Chinatown or in Asian communities, when they're going through economic hardships, crime just does not move. So there is a large cultural element.
Sure. Yeah. No. Again, we're on the same page. I believe that economics play a role. I do. Whether it's 5-7%, I think it does contribute, and that's on Trudeau. Ultimately, I think that's on our government. I think they've created very, very shitty economic times in this country.
I don't know. It just bothers me because I'm not saying you, but just in general, that very much becomes that's the rhetoric you see coming out of the government and all of this kind of stuff. And then, oh, well, we just need to put more social programs into place and all this crime will go away. And you're
no,
like,
God, no, that's nonsense. Yeah. That's nonsense. I think even if you had social programs in place, the stuff I'm talking about wouldn't significantly change anyway.
Yeah.
It just wouldn't. You take the two examples that I gave, I think they're both quite reasonable. Social programs won't help either of those people.
Yeah.
Not going to happen.
And actually, one last thing we should probably touch on here before is that another murder has occurred in Canada after a violent criminal was out on bail. So Canada's premiers have formally requested a review of the country's bail system following the murder of Tory Dunn, who was 30 in Surrey, BC on June 16th. The accused, Adam Troy Mann, who was 40, had been released from jail shortly before the killing, despite his violent criminal history. Mann had been charged in a recent stabbing incident and had a history of violent offenses, including a 2009 conviction for robbery and weapons offenses. The Premier's push for reform echoes a similar plea from January 2023, which followed the 2022 murder of Constable Greg Parachla, who was killed by a person previously granted bail despite a violent criminal history. So, this is a very, very small portion of the population.
What did we discuss not too long ago? 50%, based on my math, minimum of 44, and as much as 50% of murders in Canada were from people out on bail.
Yeah.
What are we doing here?
Yeah.
You need the punishment needs to fit the crime. Sorry.
Yeah.
Otherwise, this shit's going to continue to run rampant.
Yeah, it's absolute madness that this extremely small portion of the population is just getting a free pass, which
they're creating they're creating chaos in this country right now.
Yeah. All right, moving on to our next story. We've got U.S. senators raise alarm over Canadian terrorist threats. Canada's decision to accept more Palestinian refugees from Gaza is raising concerns in the U.S. In a letter to Homeland Security, Senator Marco Rubio and 5 other senators warned that the program would increase the risk of individuals with ties to terror groups entering the U.S. The letter follows Canada's announcement to expand the intake of Gazan refugees from 1,000 individuals to 5,000 families under temporary special measures. The senators called for heightened scrutiny of these refugees attempting to enter the U.S. The letter points out that Palestinian refugees, once in Canada, can travel internationally using a refugee travel document, which is recognized by 146 countries, including the U.S. The senators expressed concern over insufficient background checks and the potential for individuals with terror affiliations to exploit these measures. Rubio also criticized the Biden administration's border policies, claiming they enable criminals and terrorists to enter the U.S. He cited that over 233 suspected terrorists have been encountered at the northern border in FY24, surpassing previous year's totals. So should Canadian citizens be worried about allowing Gazan refugees into the country?
Well, I'm going to run through some statistics, then you can let me know what you think. More than 50% of Palestinians support Hamas. This includes the West Bank. It's about 54% in Gaza. As of late 2023, 71% of Gazans supported the Hamas attacks on October 7th. Pro-Palestinian protests have been violent, anti-Semitic, taken over countless colleges and universities, and quite frankly appear to be poisoning many of these young minds in the country. The majority of Palestinians are Muslim, with the dominant branch being Sunni Islam. And as it turns out, several terrorist groups are aligned with that particular sect of Islam. So Al-Qaeda, obviously founded by Osama bin Laden, uses Sunni Islam as a basis for its ideology. ISIS is a radical Sunni group who have been responsible for obviously widespread violence and atrocities, including bombings, executions, and enslavement. The Taliban is a Sunni Islamist group, which we all know rules Afghanistan, and we know what things are like over there right now. And Boko Haram. This group is based in Nigeria, known for violent insurgency and attacks against civilians and military targets. They seek to establish an Islamic state in Nigeria and adhere to a radical interpretation of Sunni Islam, and of course, Hamas. So those are kind of the facts. So you tell me if Canadian citizens should be concerned.
I do. I think they should for sure. And I mean, you'll get called an Islamophobe or whatever for saying anything of this sort. But like, I'm just openly willing to admit, like, Islam does terrify me. It proclaims that it's the last religion on earth and that it needs to establish itself as the global religion. Like, they don't. God Saad has done a great job of pointing out how this stuff operates. And for anybody who doesn't know who Gad Saad is, he's a university professor at McGill, and he moved to Canada from Lebanon and had to flee once the Islamic Revolution took place because he's Jewish.
Right.
And like, as a child, he was literally getting shot at while they were bringing him to the airport, like, in taking bullets to the car and all this kind of stuff. And so one of the things that he's pointed out is that it is in these Islamic extremist groups, whether it be Hamas, whether it be Al-Qaeda, this was the Brotherhood of Islam is kind of one of the main groups that pushes these thinking, is that they understand that they cannot win in kinetic warfare with the Western world, despite the fact that they want to overthrow the Western world. And so they've openly stated in their own documents, the Brotherhood of Islam, that they have three means to conquer the Western world. They will do it through the womb of their women, so by sheer numbers, by population. They'll do it through hijara, which means immigration, and then by using our own freedoms against us, so weaponizing our freedoms. And like, it doesn't take much. Go look at what's happening down in the States right now. Just this week, there was a massive pro-Palestine rally outside of when Netanyahu came to speak to Congress. There was massive demonstrations out front, and they got violent with police officers. They took down an American flag from a flag post. It's not like they just brought their own to burn. They took it down and burned the American flag and raised the Palestinian flag. And one of the things that I've pointed out before as well is like, this isn't just like, oh, we're raising a flag. It's like, what do you do when you're conquering a nation? You tear down all their flags and you raise your own. Or you've pointed out too, like when you take when a pirate ship would go on, they'd hoist the black flag, right? So these aren't just meaningless, like, oh, okay, they're just getting a little crazy. It's like, no, they openly tell you that they want to overthrow the Western world. And so it's like, you got to believe them.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, it's one of those things where I like to look at statistics when we have these conversations, because people get so sensitive and so emotional and so opinionated. So I like to be objective.
Here's actually one more that I don't think you touched on, which was 60% of Gazans say that suicide bombings are justified.
So these are the people you're dealing with. I think it's important to be objective about these things and try to curb the xenophobic rhetoric, and be like, well, you're xenophobic, you're racist, you're this, you're that. No, it's just like, look, man, here's the information. Is this how you want your country to look? Cool, do your thing. But here's what's going to happen. Guys like you and me are going to get the fuck out of this country.
Yeah.
We're gone. I don't want to be a part of it. I'm going to go somewhere where I can raise a family safely, that I'm not going to have to do any form of compelled speech for the woke mob or have to deal with any sort of Sharia law. I don't think people realize it's ultimately, politics are a numbers game. And eventually, if there are more Muslim people in this country, well, this is now their country. That's how politics work. That's exactly what happens. And people go, well, that's not going to happen, Jonathan. They'll raise their family here and then their kids will become like Canadians. Well, that used to be the way it is, but we're letting people in at such a massive rate and we have no form of assimilation whatsoever. People don't assimilate. They don't change. And now you're seeing people in government. You have the defense minister the other day helping 200 plus Sikhs get out of Afghanistan instead of Canadians. Drop in the bucket of what it's going to look like. Give it another 10 years with this stuff, and Canada will cease to be what it is. It will cease to exist as the nation that you and I grew up in. So for me, look, like, come in if you want. I don't care. But if it gets out of hand, I'm gone because I can't control this. Only thing I can control is what I do. And this could get to a point. Like I said, I've got 1 foot out of this country anyway. If this gets, like, we're hitting this inflection point in the next 2 to 3 years, if we don't correct course, it's over. For a generation, it's over.
It's as simple as, demographics are destiny, which is another thing that, God Saad is pointing
exactly.
out. And so it's like, look, you can say that it's xenophobic or it's racist or it's Islamophobic. You can toss all of these phobics at it, whatever you want. But even go look at some of the Arab countries that are doing well, like for instance in the UAE or Saudi Arabia, all of these nations. There was actually a recent delegate from, I believe it was Saudi Arabia, talking at a international conference, and he was like pleading with the West. He's like, "What are you guys doing? Like, we understand radical Islam. What are you guys doing? You guys aren't discriminating between peaceful Muslims or places that are completely radicalized with actual like revolutionized Islam, and you're just bringing them in en masse. Like even we in our own countries, our own Muslim countries, understand that from certain groups in certain areas, these are extremely dangerous people that you're dealing with." And I sent you something the other day where it's like, anybody who thinks that I'm just being hyperbolic here, it's like, go type into ChatGPT, ask it what the top 20 terrorist groups in the world are. All of them are Islamic. Go ask, and then ask them how many they've killed in the name of Islam. Hundreds upon hundreds of thousands. And so like when they get their way in, like the radical Islamicists, when they take over in these political systems, they give you three options: convert to Islam, exile, or execution. That's it. Those are your three options when radical Islam takes over. And it's not a small number like we were talking about with those percentages. So
yeah, I just think something like this gets out of hand quickly. I like to look at the US as an example of a country that grew to 350 million approximately and they're relatively diverse, of course, but they did it at a rate and used a system that was effective to maintain the culture in America. Now it's kind of going to shit over the last 10 years, very much like it is here. But the reason I use the comparison is because Canada's only a tenth the size of America, and we're already losing control here. This isn't, and we're a larger country, like geographically. So this isn't about size. It's about the rate with which you allow people into your country and the form of, and when I say assimilation, I don't mean anything forced. I mean being a part of your culture. In America, you're an American Italian. In Canada, you just say you live here. No one even cares. There's no real culture here. And I think that, at the rate that we're moving, I think we've hit that tipping point that I don't think Canada will ever have like a unified culture. Like I think it's too late. That's kind of my opinion. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
It very well could be. And, I just want to clear up as well. I've said this too. It's like, you can have a multi-ethnic state. The skin color and all this bullshit has nothing to do with it.
No.
But you cannot have a multicultural state.
No, you have to have one unified sort of, you have to have, like, I think people get confused when we say things like this and think that it's maybe racist or xenophobic. When you get along with someone, it's because you have something in common. You have a commonality. That's what creates sort of a tight fabric in society, is a commonality, a common good. But when people come into the society and have nothing in common and they don't work towards anything common, you're going to have problems. You're going to have, basically, it's a dogfight for control at that point. It's a macro scale, but that's exactly what happens. And that's what's happening here. And that's what's going to continue to happen. And I think it's, unfortunately, a lot of control. Now, I don't want to be doom and gloom. I think if Pierre Poilievre gets in and he curbs immigration very quickly, you had a good idea, which is to cut it in half of what the acceptable number used to be for the next few years. And then we kind of review at that point. I think that's a good strategy. If he does that, we could be fine. But if they keep the tap on, we're pooched.
Yeah. Yeah. And for anybody thinking about those numbers, what I was kind of mentioning was that, for decades, our number was roughly about 200,000 people a year. It fluctuated by maybe a couple 10,000 one way or another each from year to year. But over the last 5 years or so, that is skyrocketed to over 500,000 permanent residents. And then we've also seen what's happening with the whole temporary immigrants, as well as the diploma mills that are going on. So that number is much, much higher than 500,000.
1.4 million.
Yeah, that's it. Wait, 1.4 million. So if you're going to have immigration be at a rate that is sustainable. Like right now, seeing as we have just overshot what we could consider sustainable, yeah, we need to bring it down to somewhere in the neighborhood of 100,000 a year.
Yeah, we need to wrangle this mess in right now.
Yeah.
And then maybe we can fix it. Again, hard to say. I think Canada is going to continue to be the most multicultural country in the world per capita anyway. And I don't think I'm going to live here that long. Yeah. I think the economy's weak. I think there's no incentive to want to be here economically. I talk about commonality. I mean, people are losing the ability to have things in common with their neighbors. That's hard. I hated Toronto. I love being in Orangeville right now. There's so much, like, everybody gets along. Everybody's super nice. Everybody's kind. You lose that commonality. And again, it's nothing to do with skin color. It has to do with culture, right? And I feel like if your economy's pooched and your culture's pooched, realistically, what are the high earners doing here? What are the high value, high output value? What are they doing here? What's here for you? Your family? Like, that's the only thing that keep me here is my parents are old. You feel bad leaving because we have a young kid right now. So you want them to know their grandparents. But I didn't have them. There's no chance I would be here right now because why? And what direction is it going? And how long is it going to take to fix? So I just don't see it.
Also, the last thing I'll touch on in regards to this topic is, how it has become a nuclear conspiracy theory about the whole replacement theory or whatever.
What's that?
So the reason that it's nuclear is because people will claim it's about race. So they'll say they're trying to replace the white race, right? And by mass migration. But I don't think it has anything to do with race. I think it has to do with economics, because when society is a Ponzi scheme, especially a social society, which we are in Canada. So when you think about how you have these very large social programs, such as like retirement plans and all of this healthcare and such, you need a larger base on the bottom paying into the taxes than there is on people on top taking out of it, right? Well, what are we seeing in the Western world is population decline. So we're getting to the critical point where you're not even just going to have a tax base in order to fund these programs, fund the government in our social state. And so I don't think it has anything to do with trying to get rid of the white race, but I think it was, I think the masterminds of the replacement migration theory, which is outlined in a 177-page report by the UN, which literally is titled Replacement Migration. Like, they couldn't make it any more on the face. They say you're a racist conspiracy theorist if you talk about the replacement migration conspiracy theory, quote unquote. But then they're literally putting out 177-page reports about why it's necessary and how to do it. And so, but I think it's they made it about the narrative about it, about race, so that people wouldn't touch the topic. But I think it's a very real thing that they're doing, which is to try to replace our population.
Right. You're 100% correct. So Social Security is going to run out by 2035 in America. CPP, I can't imagine lasting much longer. We don't really get data on that, but like you said, it's just a Ponzi scheme anyway. They just spend the money and they have to pay the people whatever they need to. It's not like they hang on to that cash. There's no chance. That's exactly what it is. So Canada's GDP has pretty much been driven by immigration since World War II, right? It's just doing it at the right rate. The problem is we've overloaded that. It's just bad management. It's just bad Trudeau politics. We could have been continued doing the same thing at 200,000 people a year. There would have been no problem here. It would have continued to get more diverse, but you give people time to sort of adjust and assimilate where they can't be the majority. They can't sort of change the culture. When you do it at this rate, you lose control of that. It's a push and pull system. You just open the floodgates, everything kind of goes to shit. And the problem is it actually ruins the economy as well. And that's exactly what's happening here. They're trying to replace people to fix the economy, to replace the population for things like that, but they're doing it at a rate that is detrimental. Now, don't get me wrong, eventually there might be an uptick because of the volume of people. That only kind of makes sense. But what's the fallout and how long does it take to fix? That's the issue we have.
All right, moving on to our next story. We've got Trudeau appointed chair of Liberal Green Slush Fund found guilty of using the fund to advance her own business interests. Annette Verschuren, the former chairperson of Sustainable Development Technology Canada, aka the Green Slush Fund, was found to have violated ethics laws by failing to recuse herself from funding decisions that benefited companies she was associated with, according to the Ethics Commissioner last report. This follows a report by the Attorney General showing that 400 million taxpayer dollars were improperly spent. So, should politicians who are found guilty of misappropriating tax dollars be sent to prison?
So, I have this simple strategy called motivating factor. You can motivate people to do anything you want if you use the right trigger, right? So, I can get you to do horrific things if you thought I was going to kill your family. That's obviously pretty wild, but I can say it. I get you to rob a bank if I say, hey, I'm going to kill your family, Liam. You go, well, Jonathan, I don't really want to do that, but okay, I'd rather save my family. I'll do this horrific act, right? So it kind of goes both ways. Right now, if you steal from Canadians and you provide for your own business interests, it's completely unethical. Nothing happens. You just step down and move on with your life. You've got 150,000 taxpayer dollars in just those companies alone that we know about, plus all the COVID stuff, which from if I remember correctly, was 230,000 in that range. So she's stolen that much money from Canadians. Nothing happens. There's zero. There's going to be no real recourse for this woman. So you need a better motivating factor. So you said, should they be sent to prison? They should be sent to prison for like a minimum of 10 years. If you were found guilty of any sort of corruption in the government, a minimum 10 years in prison. How many people are going to do it? Zero.
I think you should also have all of your assets seized, like your house, all of this kind of stuff. Like, hey, if you can take a hunter's home and property and say a truck, if he illegally shoots an animal that he doesn't have a tag for, or that's out of season or any of these kind of things, because they can do that. They can confiscate your property for that. You're telling me that a politician taking money from taxpayers for their own benefit, which is theft, like taxation is theft. You don't have a choice as to whether you pay taxes
it's double theft.
or not.
It's theft when you take my taxes, then she takes the money from you. It's good.
Yeah. So, okay, you can take all of the property from, say, a hunter or whatever that and I know a lot of them are probably in that scenario are, yes, probably just being reckless.
Sure.
But let's say I was in a terrible economic scenario and I wanted some food and I go kill a deer not in season or with the improper weapons or whatever, and they can take all my shit for that. Then yeah, I mean, at this point, if that's the standard that you've set, then okay, I don't see any issue for that past that. I don't think.
So there you have it. Corruption is 10 years in jail and I take all your shit.
Yeah.
So yes, here's the thing. That would stop it. People are like, because we're all sitting here with our dick in our hand going, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm powerless. I voted for these people. I don't know. And they're like, well, we'll do a public inquiry behind closed doors. Yep. Turns out everything's okay, guys. Nothing to worry about here. You go, oh my God, nothing happened. And this woman just gets away with it. The price you pay is just a little public humiliation. No, minimum 10 years in prison. Take all that person's shit, everything they have, bankrupt them. No one's doing it. Not one person will do it.
Yeah. I think that if you want to, and I don't even think the penalties should be extremely high for, say, victimless crimes or anything of that nature, but if you want to rule over people, and that's what politics is I want to be in charge of coming up with the rules that you must follow, and by literally threatening you with jail, I also want to be in control of the money that you have no ability to voluntarily give up, that we are going to seize it from you. Then yeah, those penalties need to be extremely high for anybody that misuses the insane amount of power that the state has. Also, this isn't necessarily financial corruption, but just another funny thing that kind of came up here is that now in regards to this whole sustainable technology and such, discarding used solar panels in landfills is now posing a significant pollution risk. So despite the push for renewable energy, the landfilling of used solar panels poses a significant pollution risk, with toxic chemicals leaching into groundwater. Ironically, the very technology intended to reduce pollution is now causing environmental issues of its own. Global Affairs Canada is seeking a contractor to develop a recycling solution that is both cost-effective and eco-friendly. The goal is to manage hazardous materials and recycle valuable components, highlighting the challenge of balancing environmental benefits with the unintended consequences of renewable energy.
So I'm going to give you a little stat here. Canada has given $14 billion to Ukraine, and they're willing to spend 1.15 million on solving that problem. What are you talking? What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Jesus.
But hey, Jonathan, we're saving the world, man. There's no...
At least spend 2 million then on solving this problem. I don't know what to tell you. Like, Michael
Schellenberger has done ran the numbers on this. And for anybody who's wondering, Michael Schellenberger used to be an environmental activist.
And I like Schellenberger.
Yeah, he's great, but he's completely realized how corrupt in this movement has become. But he pointed out the fact that solar panels are up to 300 times worse for the environment than traditional fossil fuels.
Wow.
300 times.
Whoa. But okay. I need a little more information there, because it's like, is that on the life cycle of a solar panel? So then how many solar panels do you need to equate to? Like how does it stack up?
So you can break it down this way. There's multiple scenarios across the supply chain of building these things. So first you need to get the actual materials.
Yeah.
So for instance, that happens in a lot of these lithium and cobalt mines and such. And you can go look at it. They're just as bad as any other mine on the planet. It's not like all of a sudden to get the materials for the sustainable stuff, they come sustainably.
It's also sustainable, yeah.
Yeah. And then, so there's that. There's the mining aspect. And then there's also the implementation aspect. So solar panels take up an extreme amount of land. You can go look at the solar mountains in China. It's like complete deforestation in order to put up these solar panels.
They passed some legislation in Alberta stopping them from putting them too close to certain things.
Right.
Yeah, certain cities, city centers and stuff like that.
So then you also take up this, you factor in the amount of space that it takes. And then you also factor in the disposal of them, right? So there's like we're seeing with the solar panels leaking toxic materials in the landfills. There's also the issue when it comes to the wind turbines. A lot of the vast majority of the parts of a wind turbine aren't recyclable either. So they're just getting buried in landfills as well. And then I think what is also factored into that 300 times number is also looking at the efficiency of the energy. So,
that I could see that being a major contributing factor. So for instance,
now you've got...
that'd be a couple hundred there.
So we've seen, right, that like, say for instance, solar in Canada, I think the number is roughly like 30% of the time you can get draw. But say for instance, when it comes to oil, it's like, you can put that in a barrel and then throw it in a warehouse and come back to it 10 years later.
There's also technological inefficiency too with solar panels. Like they're cheering because I think they're around 20-30% efficiency now as well. Yeah, it's nonsense.
So like the energy output is also factored into that
makes
as
sense.
well.
That makes sense. Yeah, at the end of the day, like renewables are the way of the future. We just don't have it figured out yet. And the things that we're doing to push it, it's like it really is the cart before the horse. Mm-hmm. We are just not prepared to do this, and we're making a lot of sacrifices. Rather than spending time on refining and improving the technology, we're making massive sacrifices in the name of climate activism, which is wild.
All right, moving on to our next story. We've got Canada has the third worst GDP growth per capita among 30 top economies. Canada is struggling with low GDP growth per person, ranking 28th out of 30 advanced economies from 2014 to 2022, according to a Fraser Institute study. The country's GDP per capita growth has stagnated since 2014, falling behind the OECD average. By 2022, Canada's GDP per capita was $46,035, lagging $17,649 behind the US. The report links this to low productivity, insufficient investment, and a growing government sector. To improve, it suggests reducing regulations, enhancing trade, encouraging innovation, reforming taxes, and scaling back government. So this report kind of gives its own reasons for the economic downslide of Canada, but is there anything you saw missing, or what do you think is the main factors causing that?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a few more things. So productivity stagnation is a big problem for Canada. Our labor productivity is particularly weak, especially compared to the US, and it's only getting worse. We've also had a bad economic strategy of focusing on sectors like housing and credit, and short-term fiscal policies, which do not deliver sustainable growth. Man, it's so wild. Our regulatory environment absolutely stifles competition and innovation. No one wants to be a part of this economy. So again, this is just government overreach that's really contributing to this. And then you also have to consider, like, we have incredibly high spending on healthcare and education, but the outcomes do not meet anybody's expectations, basically. And perhaps one of the bigger things, is housing affordability. It's a significant issue, even for people with really, really good jobs, which you talked about before, they can't even get a mortgage. Trudeau, printing hundreds of billions of dollars didn't help our economy. And, government spending, which they mentioned, is at an all-time high. You know what I mean? Like if we just curb government spending and stop growing the size of public service, we can get a lot of this under control. And finally, we have this reliance on high immigration. But again, like I said, it is not translated into proportional economic benefits.
What's funny is you're now seeing, so Chrystia Freeland and Stephen Gubeau both bragged earlier this week about a IMF forecast that came out claiming that Canada has the fastest growing economy among G7 nations. And I've seen this floating around on Twitter a bunch with other leftists kind of posting and saying, hey, look at how well Canada is doing in different types of graphs on the overall economy. But it's so insane to me that these people are only proving how bad things are becoming in Canada because all of that GDP growth as a nation, our overall GDP is coming from our population increase, which is increasing at roughly a rate of 2.7% right now. The only countries that rival us in that area is African countries.
Right.
And so, yes, our overall GDP is growing, but as this points out, this study is that our GDP per person is not growing. So like a good way to think about this is like if you have 10,000 if you have 10 people in a house making $10,000 each a year, that GDP for that house would be $100,000. But let's say you put 10 more people in there and now there's only enough economic activity for everybody to make $7,500. The GDP for that house with 20 people in it would be $150,000. So theoretically, you could post a study saying, oh my God, look at all this economic growth of this house. It's grown by 50% this year, despite the fact that every single individual in that house is making 25% less. Now, those are very arbitrary numbers and also over-exaggerated, but that is exactly what is happening here in terms of our out-of-control immigration and our economic fallout from that.
Yeah, I mean, what I compare it to is like when you think about vaccine safety. Relative risk, absolute risk.
Right.
I'm going to need both to know the efficacy here.
Yeah.
And it's the same with the economics. If you don't give me both, then just shut up. It doesn't make a difference.
And what's nuts too is like this kind of stuff, like people will sit there and go, oh, like who are you to talk about economics in this sense and whatever. This is like page 1 textbook economics.
Yeah, I'm a moron. No one should listen to me. 100%.
This is not like advanced stuff that I'm talking about here. This is like basic economic knowledge. And one of the things that you pointed to as well with the mass money printing, like how much was it that he printed?
So minimum 400 billion. I think it might have been closer to 600 though. And then it was all, like you said, it's that works its way into the economy through quantitative easing. And then you see how that money just basically goes to people that have more money, which is why you saw a huge transfer in wealth.
Yeah.
And also people don't realize, well, people may realize, but through that process, banks just make an automatic flip on that money of a couple percentage points, which is wild.
Yeah.
The amount of money, the government's just like, hey guys, we're going to give you hundreds of millions of dollars. I just need you to press this button, sign here, we're good to go. Canadians, fucked.
And then, so you look at it and you go, okay, what determines the price of something? Again, this is just basic economics. It's the relationship between supply and demand.
Yes.
And so when you flood the economy with endless amounts of money, just that you've just conjured up out of thin air, all you're doing there is artificially driving demand up because you have a vast more amount of money chasing the same amount of goods, which causes the cost of those goods to increase.
And the reason this was such a big problem through COVID is production and manufacturing was down across the world. Home building was down across the country. So that's exactly why everything just shot through the roof and they can't get inflation under control.
And yeah, I guess it's even worse because it wasn't more demand chasing the same amount of goods. It was more demand chasing less goods.
Exactly.
And so, and that's to your point about talking about how the largest wealth transfer, this is exactly how it operates because the extremely wealthy people don't have their wealth tied up in just a savings account with all of their saving, like their money that they've set aside. They've got it in assets,
yes,
which is, again, what rises when you print the money. So they become more asset rich. and the people who are liquid, like say the people that live paycheck to paycheck, all you're doing in that process is vastly diminishing the purchasing power that person has.
It's exactly what it is. You're basically taxing the citizens, and then you're taxing them again via inflation. The inflation goes to the corporations. The taxation goes to the governments. Anybody below the top line just becomes more broke.
Yeah. And, we're even seeing too now that over half of Canada's professionals are actively seeking new employment. And this is the problem that you were pointing to, which is that people think there's jobs out there where they can get paid better and do better. And we were also saying how this idea that all of a sudden corporations are doing so well or businesses are doing so well in this environment in Canada right now is just a complete fallacy, because their bottom lines are getting eaten alive as well. And their taxes, they're paying more taxes than ever as well. And one of the examples that you and I were talking about was how insane it is, even the fact that an employer has to pay taxes on
having an employee. Wild.
Again, you should only ever use taxes as a penalty in something. I don't even agree with forceful taxation in principle, but if it's going to exist, taxation is a punishment. And so the idea that you would punish people for providing a good to society, which is employment,
yes,
is just insane.
You should be rewarded, not taxed.
Same thing on income. It's what do you mean? I'm doing something productive. Tax me on using it for, say, shitty things like, say, smoking or ultra processed foods. Put the tax rates on those through the roof.
Consumption tax is the way to go.
Yeah, but only maybe on certain things that are, say, harmful, because those things have far-reaching consequences of, okay, if you smoke more, you're going to use the healthcare system more. If you eat more processed foods, you're going to use the healthcare system more. And it's therefore, we can put a tax or a punishment on those things that lead to a more of a burden on our systems. But yeah, this idea of taxing employment and income is just insane. All right, moving on to our last story for the day. We've got Trudeau vacationing in BC after Liberal MPs told scheduling a summer caucus meeting was impossible. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau took a family vacation in British Columbia, even as Liberal MPs called for an in-person caucus meeting to address the party's poor poll numbers in the loss of a key seat in a Toronto by-election last month. Trudeau's vacation came at a time when Canada faces significant challenges. The country is grappling with a housing crisis, a healthcare system under immense strain, and rising unemployment. Many Canadians are frustrated by the timing of Trudeau's trip, viewing it as out of touch with the nation's pressing issues. Earlier this month, Liberal caucus chair Brenda Shanahan rejected requests for a summer caucus meeting, citing scheduling issues. Trudeau's vacations have repeatedly sparked public criticism, some Canadians accusing him of hypocrisy regarding climate activism and questioning the appropriateness of his trips during these issues. So, does Trudeau deserve family vacations while Canada becomes a raging dumpster fire?
Well, I mean, Liam, if you ask him, he works significantly more than the average Canadian.
Yeah.
What a slap in the face that was.
Yeah.
Wild that arrogant prick said that. That being said, in 2023 alone, Trudeau took 3 vacations, including trips to Tofino, Montana, and Jamaica, which accounted to over 678,000 Canadian taxpayer dollars. That's about double his pay. So even if he's the hardest working dictator on the planet, his vacations should not cost Canadians twice his salary per year.
So for anybody who's unaware of what we're referencing there, when Trudeau was talking about how he works more than all Canadians, pretty much, was Kean, one of the editor in chief of the Counter Signal, confronted Trudeau on this vacation, just showed up randomly on this beachfront in Tofino and gave Trudeau a impromptu interview. And Trudeau, went off on him. And look, you can criticize the idea that politicians deserve privacy, and this was an invasion of that privacy, and getting into the realm of infringing on Trudeau's ability to have a family. And sure, there's maybe some criticisms to be had there. But while he was giving this interview, Trudeau just kept saying, "Oh, I don't have any time to have a vacation with my family, and it's people like you who are causing the scenario where people don't want to get into public service because of the harassment like this scenario. But yeah, so he was talking about how he works harder than all Canadians, but in 2019, he took 91 personal days, which accounts for nearly 25% of the year. In 2020, he took 48 personal days, and in 2021, he took 78 personal days. And as you pointed out, all of those are at taxpayer expenses. So it is just absolutely insane. And then on that front about whether he deserves the privacy with his family, all of this, again, under normal circumstances with normal people, I would definitely sympathize on that front. But we're talking about a guy that has crushed the Canadian economy, that has taken away the future, that is, yes, facilitating mass migration, which is causing a lot of issues. And also, he cracked down, and even we've seen it ruled in federal courts that he was unconstitutional and took away Canadians' rights to peacefully protest. And so it's just to me, to all of a sudden hold this standard and say, okay, yeah, you shouldn't, because I've seen Kean getting a lot of heat on Twitter for this, for barging in on his vacation, essentially saying that's crossing a line. But to me, I'm like, I'm sorry, that guy doesn't deserve any privacy.
How many Canadians did not get a vacation this year because the economy is so bad because of that man?
Yeah.
Slap him in the face. He does not deserve a vacation.
Yeah.
I do not care. You've been saying this lately. Politicians should have to live at the standard of Canadians. Mm-hmm. These people are like kings. It's an oligarchy. This is ridiculous the way they're behaving and what he's doing. The guy needs a slap in the face and a touch of reality. So I'm 100% on board with what this guy did. That being said, kind of back to this point of like, how do we have a system that allows our leader to spend twice his pay on vacations per year while he's in office? This is a broken system and it needs to change.
And even too, like, look at what he calls work, right? Remember when the security briefings about foreign intelligence comes to us? Oh, I don't really read those. And it's okay. Nice. So you don't read your security briefings. And then you see when he goes on these worldwide jet setting trips, right? We just saw him do a 6-day Indo-Pacific tour that he billed taxpayers $225,000 roughly for in-flight meals and all of this. It's like, that's not work, man. You want to talk about you work harder than Canadians? Like, and I'm not saying that I'm on this like daily labor grind. By no means am I holding myself in that position. But if you're going to say that you work harder than all Canadians, why don't you go spend a week on an oil field?
Yeah, put a shovel in your hand, pal. Dig a hole. Let's go.
Why don't you actually have to go try to do some roofing in the middle of July?
Exactly.
Like this. No chance. Your work is getting dressed up and going and shaking hands and posing for pictures. Like, you're not doing even okay, I'm somebody that say lives more in the intellectual realm, right? The work that I consider myself to do is like sitting down at the end of the day, and instead of just sitting down and watching TV or binging Netflix or something that would be more enjoyable, I force myself to read for 2 or 3 hours so that I can be more knowledgeable about the things that I'm talking about. Do you think that Trudeau is sitting there going, okay, Canada's in a bad economic scenario right now. I really need to get more in knowledge on economics and bury myself in this to figure it out. Like,
which is so frustrating. If you're the CEO of a company, which is what this guy is, and the company's failing, which is what this country's doing, your job is to go, where are my gaps? How can I fill them? How can I fix them? Otherwise, I'm going to get fired. Again, these guys have no accountability, blowing all of our money without a care in the world, and then telling everybody in Canada he works harder than the rest of us.
Yeah.
Fuck this guy.
Insane. All right. Well, to just wrap it all up there, all of those issues that we talked about in this whole episode, because I know that was just a long kind of vicious rant about the state of Canada, but all of those issues stem from this quote unquote woke mind virus, right? And so, like, whether it be the crime skyrocketing for taking it easy on criminals through bail reforms, whether it be bringing in immigration from regions in the world that are highly radicalized and also anti-West in nature. They hate us. They despise us. And then also the green slush funds, of using taxpayer monies through the guise of we're saving the planet in order to further their own business interests. And then also like using immigration to fake bolster Canada's GDP growth, despite it making it worse for every single Canadian in this country. And now Trudeau vacationing, saying he works hard and works harder than Canadians while taking more personal days than like 25% of the year. All of this stems from this very progressive mindset. All right. Anything else you wanted to rant about, get angry about before we go? All right. So before we get out of here, don't forget to head over to our Substack in order to either subscribe for free to our newsletter, which goes out 5 days a week, or you can sign up and support what we do here if you enjoy it and keep us going. And that will also get you exclusive podcast episodes as well as exclusive articles where we go a little bit more in depth into these kind of things than we can in ranting on the podcast. All right. We'll catch you next time.
Bye, everybody.